Welcome to Vet Zone, where passion for animals, science, and medicine lives. A bit of mouse brain, a smidgen of hamster kidney, and a rabies vaccine. In our last podcast, we tackled the common question of why you might give a rabies vaccine that is labeled for one species to an animal of a different species. This podcast is an expansion of this topic and covers some of the oddities of vaccine production. In the late 1880s, Louis Pasteur worked to create the first vaccine against rabies. This was not the first vaccine ever made, though. The Western world often attributes the creation of the first vaccine to Dr. Edward Jenner. On a bright summer day in May 1796, Dr. Jenner inoculated an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps with the cowpox virus. Then, 9 days later, he challenged the boy by exposing him to live, deadly smallpox. When the boy exhibited no clinical signs and survived, Dr. Jenner concluded correctly that he had protected the child from the dangerous smallpox virus. At the time, parents often voluntold their children to participate in such experiments. And you thought your childhood was tough. All of this may seem risky at best, negligent and immoral at worst. But to be fair, James Phipps wasn't the first child to be inoculated with cowpox to protect from smallpox. Dr. Jenner was a young teenager when this practice started. However, Dr. Jenner provided a challenge and documented the study. Over the course of his studies, one child did die from a fever, and history assumes a bacterial contaminant to the vaccine inoculant. Despite this, Jenner included his own children in some of his experiments. History forgets to mention how his wife Catherine felt about this experimentation on children, including their own. Once again, we lived in a blessed age, all things considered. Long before, hundreds of years in fact before Dr. Jenner's famous experiments, the Chinese were attenuating the smallpox virus and delivering modified live vaccines. Today, when you generate modified live vaccines, you must attenuate or weaken the virus or bacteria so that you can infect the patient, create an immune response, and not cause illness. If you use a killed pathogen, you typically don't need to weaken it first. Pasteur did attenuate the rabies vaccines in rabbits and harvested the virus from their spinal cords. While Louis didn't need to attenuate the virus prior to killing the pathogen, his method of serial passages through different cell lines establishes the basic concept of vaccine attenuation used today for modified live vaccines. Luckily for the rabbits of today, we use cell cultures, not voluntold rabbits. However, Louis was smart and cautious because back then they didn't even know what the pathogen was. Viruses were not discovered until 1898. Wow, that is almost 20 years after Pasteur's famous inoculation and 100 years after Jenner's famous or infamous vaccination. Imagine beating an enemy you can't even fully qualify. True geniuses. In the U.S. and developed world, we witness more vaccines on cell line cultures, which include baby hamster kidney cells, vero cells, human diploid cells, and chick embryo cells. A purified duck embryo cell line also exists. What are vero cells, you ask? Why, kidney epithelial cells extracted from an African green monkey, I would answer. For veterinary rabies vaccines, hamster kidney cells are a common choice. Whether veterinary or human, it is common to also utilize bovine and porcine media components. A common question regarding hamster or monkey kidney cell lines is, why kidney? And does this lead to kidney risks when given the vaccine? Understandable, but not to fear. The cells are kidney epithelial cells, or cells that line the kidney. They are not functional kidney cells, or even immunologically close to them. Just like our skin cells, they are epithelial in nature. They even produce keratin. If you are a researcher and tried to use these to study the kidney, you will be laughed out of the lab. They simply represent epithelia and work well in culture. Now that we know that veterinary and human vaccines might have been grown on hamster kidney cells with bovine media components, it shouldn't surprise you when one rabies vaccine might be labeled for dogs, cats, horses, and ferrets. In the last podcast, we discussed how human rabies vaccines differ, and in this podcast, we covered how they relate. We will close this podcast with the words of Carlos Gershenson. Before being humans, we are animals. Thank you for listening.